Howdy y'all. Welcome back to Mage, the podcast.
Well, hey there, friends, and welcome back to Mage the podcast, the show where we explore the wild edges of imagination, magic, and meaning. I'm real glad you're here today because we've got a special treat, a conversation with the thoughtful and ever-curious James Curcio. Now, this episode is part of a little ongoing series we're doing, a string of chats with folks who walk the crooked path of magic, mysticism, and the occult, whether as scholars, storytellers, or practitioners. I don't have a proper name for this segment just yet, but if you've got a good one rattling around in that clever noggin of yours, drop me a line. I'm all ears. A quick heads up before we dive in. The audio quality in this one's a bit rough in places. I blame gremlins in the laptop, and honestly, that's probably not far from the truth. So thanks in advance for your patience. I first met James years back when I was talking to folks from the Generation Hex book, and we touch on that a bit in today's chat. Since then, James has been busy writing books, designing games, and diving deep into what he calls modern myth-making. We talk about all sorts of good stuff in this episode, where magic lives in role-playing games like Mage the Ascension, how art and storytelling can be a kind of ritual, and the joy of playing a goblin who's more mess than mystic. It's a wide-ranging, soul-stirring kind of conversation, and I think you'll find plenty to chew on. And just a little personal note. Right now, I'm running a Cult Divinity Lost campaign, and I've been having an absolute blast wallowing in its dark, Gnostic horror. I'll be launching an audiobook-style podcast based on our gameplay this September, so keep your ears peeled for that too. There's a trailer you can listen to wherever you get your podcast, and the name of the show is called Operation Watchtower. All right, that's enough from me. Let's get to it.
Howdy, James. Today, we are going to talk about the wonderful world of magic. And some of the things we're going to discuss is what is magic? Where does magic culture stand these days? And how can we breathe life into magic in role-playing games like Mage the Ascension? And before we jump in, what I'd like to do is start up from the beginning. And what I mean by this is recently I was reading Generation Hex. I know that book is almost 20 years old at that point, but last week I was reading your essay. And so what I want to do is two questions here to get us started off. First of all, what got you introduced into role-playing games, and when did you realize that magic was something that you yourself could tap into?
Sure. I started role-playing games, probably around the regular age. I don't know, like 12 or 13, something like that. My mom had a babysitter come visit, and we wound up playing D&D and playing with the houseplants. It was when she decided that we shouldn't have a babysitter anymore. But we became friends, and he introduced me to, I guess it was AD&D first edition back then. This was like, I guess the late 80s, something like that. So, I started playing around then, and it became part of, at the time, it was mostly a game, but it became more and more a part of the writing and creative process for me as I started getting older. And that's kind of dovetailed with the work I've done really throughout my life since then, where I've been periods where I haven't been playing RPGs as, frequently, and periods where I've been playing it less, more frequently, but it's kind of always been there. And lately I've been returning to it a lot and thinking about the connection between RPGs and I guess we could say occult practice, and we can talk about that a little bit.
Well, let's talk a little bit about magic for a second. Magic and the occult. When did that enter your life?
Probably about 16 or 17, pretty young too. I got introduced to, Aleister Crowley and sort of like Western esotericism and that sort of thing. And the next 3 or 4 years ago, I was very into it. I think that's a thing that happens to a lot of people, like around 18, 19, 20, like with like the Crowley phase. And I'm happy I grew out of it. But, it was still a good introduction. And also White Wolf, Vampire and Mage kind of became part of my RPG playing at the time too. In the time since, I don't know if I'd call myself like a typical occultist. I don't know even if it's such a thing, but I have studied various types of occultism and esotericism and myth from a variety of cultures over the years, and far from the ideas and practices in the way that I've connected with them. But I always feel a little uncomfortable calling myself an occultist or trying to represent myself as, like being a practitioner of a particular tradition because I'm, such a dabbler in that way. So I don't want to kind of misrepresent myself in that way.
What I
So,
understand is occultists sort of exploring and getting to know the unseen. So maybe you've always been an
sure.
occultist?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. And so, and in that way, certainly. I mean, in the way that it's like I engage with a lot through art and varieties of art and game, right? But I try to keep a window open for like the ineffable, or the sacred, if you want to call it that, or even just the uncertainty at the ground of our experience. That's kind of the window that I think kind of the quote unquote occult comes is in our uncertainty and in being open to that. But at the same time, I guess part of my discomfort is the fact that a lot of people kind of flip flop and then suddenly it becomes a sort of certainty where it's like, they become committed to the sort of ideas they got from occultism about certain energies or forces or whatever, whatever it is, like that's something that they're certain about. And it seems like it's like flipping a thing on its head and then you wind up in the same place, kind of.
Well, that makes sense. Occultism in the end it can be another ism depending on how you treat it.
Right. Yeah.
Let's tackle one of the big questions before we go forward. What is magic really? Or in another, let me reframe this. What is magic to you?
This is going to probably sound funny, but in a way, I think it's part of it is engaging with play. It's like, I mean, on the one hand, it's very serious. It's in terms of like symbolism and that sort of thing, but also like playing with other people, playing with ideas, keeping that sort of openness to it. I think that's sort of like, I mean, I don't think that's what magic is, but like that's the first spark. That's the way you get in is by keeping that open and by, I think that's why RPGs, the idea of it being partially a game, it's storytelling with other people, right? I'm always pretty big on the story side of RPGs, but the game element is important, I think, in terms of it retaining that sense of play. I mean, a lot of people talk about like sort of like keeping the inner child or whatever, and that's maybe a little too, I don't know, something for me. But still that idea though, of the sort of like ability you had when you were a child, or at least a lot of people have, to imagine worlds and imagine themselves in worlds that are open to like multiple layers of meaning. Some of which are, kind of like beyond your ken at that point in time, right? Especially when you're a kid, because you know so little of the world.
So let me ask you this. How old were you when you wrote that essay for Generation Hex?
I must have been like 24, maybe. It was like a year or two after my first novel, Join My Cult, came out with Blue Falcon Press. At the time, Blue Falcon was still kind of known in counterculture circles as having published some of Aleister Crowley's books and some of Robert Anton Wilson books. And so, I was coming off of that. And, I haven't even thought about the essay in so long, but I think I wrote it was about modern mythology, right? Or at least I talked about mythology in it.
I believe so.
It's been 20 years. It's just funny to me because I'm now, kind of returning to this idea of modern mythology and, we're launching a podcast, the Modern Mythology Podcast, is about RPGs, and it's also about creating and engaging with myths through the method of RPGs.
Well,
It all comes full circle, I suppose. But yeah, it's about 24.
so another observation I have, and it's not a novel one, I'll admit that, but it seems like the interest in magic, it waxes and wanes with the times. So
Sure.
what do you think is the state of magic culture right now in 2025?
I mean, it's hard for me to make statements about, what lots of other people are doing. But I do think, I mean, there's this tendency to sort of cult revivals happen at periods of uncertainty historically. I mean, there was, the Surrealists in France. There's or even just the Victorian, like late 1800s, early 1900s period. And then during World War I and II, both those periods, occultism became popular again. And I think that there is a resurgence of that sort of interest. And I would hypothesize that some of that has to do because of the uncertainty of the times we live in. Now, so it's like you recognize your uncertainty on one hand, but then people kind of are still searching for it. You go into the occult. I think some people go into the occult with the idea of trying to control or understand things. I've, at least over time, I've kind of thought about it in the opposite way. It's more about relinquishing control than about gaining it. But I think the draw originally is to, have some sort of understanding of these things that we don't understand, right?
Well, something that I've seen come up in my readings again and again is that it seems when people feel the most powerless, that's when there seems to be an uptick in the interest in magic and the occult.
Yes, yeah, exactly. That's what I'm getting at. Yeah, I think that's a thing.
So you brought up your Modern Mythologies podcast. I really want to hear more about that. Tell us about that.
So Modern Mythology was like an online magazine, zine, whatever, for many years. It was popular for a little while and then kind of fell in the background, became my blog. And in recent years, it's gotten less and less traffic and just kind of fell off of even my radar. And I've been having all these conversations with a friend of mine, a couple of friends of mine, but one in particular, Scott. He's very kind of versed in RPGs. He's probably played more systems than anyone I know. He just recently got rid of a library of like 1,000 books of RPG stuff. But he still has others. So we've been just bouncing around these ideas, and he's also interested in esotericism and mysticism and mythology. And so after having conversations for several years about these things and playing games together, it's like, let's open this up. Let's start recording our conversations, and we're gonna start bringing other people into it too once we kind of set the pace. Our first episode should be going up pretty soon.
Oh, that's interesting. I was under the impression that it was going to be an actual play podcast, but this seems to be more.
We are doing some. Yeah, we're doing some actual play, but when we do actual play on this podcast in particular, anyways, it's more to like demo a system and talk about something about it, rather than sort of it being about the story of like the actual play. So it's more of a conversation-based podcast. We may be launching some actual play, just purely actual play podcasts down the road, but we haven't released those yet.
I'm excited about that. And I do love actual play podcasts, but I also like podcasts that talk about the mechanics and the philosophy behind games. And I don't think there's enough of them. So I'm really looking forward to Modern Mythologies.
Yeah, it's like, the idea that kind of core sense idea that we've been working with is of the relationship between story and system and the way that they push on each other. I'm also an author, and I found that running RPGs and writing books they're different processes, but there's definitely a lot of overlap. I think actors find that too, although it's a different overlap there. And so, that's kind of the way that we've been kind of getting into it the first couple episodes, is trying to explore those, element, like basically the methods that system itself kind of pushes us to out of our comfort zone, but also the way that it can like reify or like recreate patterns that we associate with a certain genre. Like why does one system in some cases like actually create a cyberpunk story, or a fantasy story, or is it more like the trappings of the system are just pretending to do that, and we're kind of doing it for the system, which is that can work if you have the right group. You don't even necessarily need a system then, but there's something to that, and that's kind of been my falling out with D&D in some ways. It's come from recognizing that. I still have some fondness for it, but over the years I've discovered that it's less of an role-playing game than it pretends to be. That's a whole other side conversation. You can take another day, perhaps.
Well, tell you what, let's just use D&D and let's say Mage as an example. Now, I would argue, and maybe I'm mistaken, but I would say it depends on the dungeon master and the players that shape the game. But it sounds like from what you're saying is it's baked into the system overall with the rule setting. So,
it's kind of that way. But I'm not saying like there's something where it's like a kind of the personality of the group, of the storyteller or whatever, and the sort of like method of working together they have can be such that like it doesn't matter what the system is. So it's not like you can't have like a fantasy storytelling or role playing experience with people when you're playing D&D. I don't want people to think I'm blaming that. But more the rules themselves. You look at the books, 90% of it's combat systems, and sort of more of a sort of its history of war game elements kind of coming out there, whereas the system itself kind of is sort of agnostic in a way about your role playing, aside from giving you suggestions, but doesn't push you.
Well, I'll tell you what, maybe I'm thinking about this the wrong way. I see your point when it comes to Dungeons and Dragons, but let's go
Hmm.
to World of Darkness, and we'll say classic World
Sure.
of Darkness, 1990s. What do you think is inherent about that game system? Because the way they advertise it, or at least the way they promote it in the books, is it's more narrative based and more story based than, say, combat based
Sure.
like Dungeons and Dragons. So what are your thoughts on the not World of Warcraft, the World of Darkness system?
Sure. Well, I mean, I should start by saying that World of Darkness and Chronicles of Darkness now like are probably some of my favorite systems in a lot of ways. At least some of the like sort of kind of basic premises of it and the way that it works. So I love the system. I love the world. But there are elements. Like, it's still kind of a traditional RPG in a lot of ways in terms of how it sort of represents a character with the stats, and it doesn't. I mean, like especially back in the '90s when I played with some groups. It still wind up being very combat oriented. It still wind up being very kind of not necessarily the way the books were trying to push people to go. And I think some of that's just, that gaming hadn't developed as much in that way. The Forge hadn't happened. And like, there wasn't, I mean, I guess Fate is one example of, system that's trying to do that sort of more storytelling element where the system is more based around the narrative than like a representation of like your character's capacity to like lift a car or open a door or how fast they can run, that sort of thing. Some systems are less interested in that.
Is there a game system out there right now that sort of captures the flavor of the way you'd like to play or a way a game you think should be played?
I don't have like a favorite system. I mean, honestly, I was saying if I had a favorite system, it would probably be World of Darkness or Chronicles of Darkness. I am developing my own system. I've been working on for a number of years, which will at the least hopefully be that. I will say in the last couple of years, I've really been enjoying playing Blades in the Dark. I don't know if you're familiar with Blades.
I'm familiar with it, but I've never played it.
I think it does a good job of sort of presenting, a setting and integrating the setting with like how the rules work and giving you enough things to work with within the system that it's not completely fluff and you're not kind of just, going it without any sort of guide, but also there's not a whole lot of crunch or like things that are like you're not. Whenever I play Blades, I don't spend a whole lot of time like cracking open books and like, oh, look up page 173 of this book to see what this power. Okay, look up, where it's almost like, you can get diverted for quite a while if with some systems that way. It's nice having something that is kind of sleek enough that you're able to get into it and keep the story going without having too many of those
Well, right now,
stops along the way.
my favorite role playing game system right now is actually Fate Accelerated, and the reason why
Mm-hmm.
is that it's a game that I can play with my grandson, and he's 7 years old, and we had his character up and running in like 2 minutes, and then we were playing the game immediately, and it was so flexible and lightweight that it truly was more about the narrative than anything else, and it was a blast.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying it's the best game system out there, but for
No,
my needs
exactly.
right
Yeah,
now.
that's why I kind of was. Yeah, like I was kind of I don't know if there is a best game, and that's kind of what we're getting at. I think is that like there are different systems that drive more groups of people towards certain experiences than others, but there isn't one experience that everyone is trying to get to. There's many, and a big part of it really is just the buy-in of the group that like we're engaging in a spy story, or we're engaging this sort of story, and these are the sort of the rules, right? Kind of what systems do I prefer to create a certain kind of experience is probably an easier thing, but I do fall back on World of Darkness a lot just because I love the simplicity of the dots equal the dice, and you add this to that, and you can kind of by combining different skills and stats, you can kind of look at a character sheet, and if you know the system and sort of the things that it has implicit within it, like you can certainly tons of like little things inside all the books, but you can also just look at the character sheet and make a call, and when you're running a session, and it's not going to slow things down. Yet it maintains a certain amount of fun.
So we're here to talk about Mage. So let's bring it back to that. What got me thinking about magic in role-playing games is an interview that I read with Alan Moore about his latest book. It's called The Great Win. I don't know if you've heard anything about it, but it's about as thick as a phone book, from what I understand.
I love Alan Moore. I didn't know. It's cool.
Yeah, I plan to read it sometime this year. Right now, I'm still making my way through Jerusalem, which I think is like, I don't know, 1,000 pages. So it's going to take me a while. But my point being is that there was an interview with him, and he said that if you or I stumbled into real magic, like, and his example was stepping through a cabinet and going into another world and talking to a talking lion, he said that it would freak us out, that there would be crying and vomiting and therapy and a whole regimen of psychoactive drugs to get over that experience. And
Sure.
on the other hand, you got Grant Morrison, and I remember this one line of dialogue in his comic book, The Invisibles, that he suggested that if we encountered anything beyond our ken, it would either be unseen by us or it would just get folded into our existing framework of reality. So, given your
Sure.
background with role playing games and given your background with magic and the occult, how might storytellers and their players bring magic to life in their games? And I know that's an open ended question because I want it to be open for
Ooh.
your interpretation.
Yeah, and that's a question I could sit on and write a book on. That's a big one. Yeah. It's funny. Alan Moore and Grant Morrison are like the Apollonian and Dionysian
Yeah.
in comics. I don't know which would be which, really, but but that sort of um, polarity. Yeah. I mean, maybe this is getting out of the question in a way, or whatever. But like that question is really what I'm trying to explore, both the podcast and with a lot of the projects I'm working on now. Developing the Fallen Cycle stories and the RPG. We're trying to explore that very question. I think it's a good one, but if I could answer it to my own satisfaction in a 30 seconds, I suppose it would be make it not as necessary for me to go on these long safaris.
Well, just take a
But
stab at it.
one part of it that's kind of an easy entrance, I think, is sort of like if you engage with archetypes, right? Like in the sort of Jungian, Joseph Campbell sort of sense, like you pick an archetype or a symbol that's of particular interest to you, or draws to you, or perhaps one that you're afraid of, or that has the opposite effect that pushes you away. And instead of, I'm not as interested in taking an archetype and just saying I'm going to play that as a character, right? So much as like taking it as something where how can I change this idea or add something different to it, complicate it, and explore it from a different angle. And that's I think the one way to start engaging with a practice that is both playing an RPG and just playing with your friends, but also drawing and informing these things. Because in the background, and this is at least me, in the background, I'll start researching, and getting into, and then start doing meditations and start visualizing that symbol, and so because I want to get to know the character better. All right, so you can wind up being, doing sort of almost like a God form invocation in the process of it, and at the same time, I think it helps free me up a little bit because it's not so heavy and it's not so like grandiose, I guess, as it would be if you're like, I'm invoking a God form, like, what the hell do you think you are, right? But no, I'm just playing an RPG with my friends.
Well, it's interesting something that you said back there about playing something that you're uncomfortable with, because usually so much of role
Mhm.
playing, depending on who you are in a person, how long you've been playing, but so much of role playing is about a power fantasy. I get to be the warrior.
Yeah.
I get to be the wise sage. But to play something that makes you uncomfortable, that's kind of exploring. That's a little bit of shadow play, isn't it?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. And that's funny because that's true. And yes, I do some competency porn play myself, or at least elements of it. It's fun to an extent, but at least for me, it got old pretty fast, especially if that's like the only thing. Look at how cool my character is. Look how, um, I mean, whether it's something that you're exploring that you have sort of antipathy about as well as interest, or whether it's just a character that, like one of my most favorite characters recently in a fantasy setting has been playing a goblin who's like a complete fuck up, except he's like really good at like, goblin-y things, stealing things, moving around stuff, but he's definitely not someone where it's like I'm being a cool badass by playing this character. It's the opposite. And this is not like a sort of, I guess, a magical approach to play necessarily, but it's definitely been eye-opening to me, like how much more fun it has been playing him than playing the like Legolas. Which like Legolas is a quote-unquote cool character, but like even in the movie, like what does he do? What do your elven eyes see? Like what else does he do? He's kind of there to like look cool and shoot arrows. You want to be doing more as as a player in a session, I think, and a lot of times a character who struggles in certain ways can be more interesting in that way.
Just as a quick aside, a year or two ago, I ran a Mothership game, and one of the characters was a industrial spy, and he was also a doctor. And two people played that character, and the way they played him was more like Burke from the movie Aliens, rather than as a protagonist. And they just made an absolute shit of the character, and it was a blast. And it was fun to see people want to explore that rather than a heroic character.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if you have a heroic character, it's nice to have foils in the team. I mean, like The Expanse, I love that show and the books. And also, incidentally, it started as an RPG. But like, Holden is like the quintessential, especially at the beginning, like, paladin-esque like character, right? Like, but you don't want the whole party to be Holden. That would be intolerable for them, for the players, But it's it can be good to have a Holden in the party, but it's also good to have an Amos. I don't know if you're familiar with The Expanse, but
I am, and on the flip side, I would not want a whole party to be full of Amoses.
Right? Yeah, totally fair. Yeah, he needs people to keep him on his, on the path, because he can't see it himself. Yeah, for sure.
Before we wrap things up, I want to talk about the other projects you've got in the works. Now, we talked about modern mythologies, and you've also worked on a graphic novel. You've got your role-playing game you're working on. You've got a lot of irons in the fire. Is there anything else that we should know about?
Boy, so yeah, the Fallen Cycle is a big one, just because like there's a bunch of it's kind of in my sort of myth punk sandbox for like over a decade now. So it's got illustrated novels, comics, working on the RPGs. But I've actually also I released a demo in 2022. It's kind of my pandemic album. So I hadn't been working on recording music in a long time, and being especially the early days of the pandemic, I was just home like everyone else. So it gave me time to start recording and seeing where I was at. And so I'm finally at the point now of next couple of weeks I'm going to be releasing an EP, my first recorded like release in a long time. Tomorrow's Forgotten Relics.
Right on.
That'll be out on streaming stuff. Yeah, I think we talked about past music projects in the
Oh yeah.
When.
For people who don't know, James and I go way back, and so I've done an electronic music show and an ambient show, and James has helped me out on both occasions. So here's another question I want to ask. Social media is kind of a mess right now. So is there a hub or a website that people can go to keep up with you and get involved with the projects you're doing?
Sure. I mean, like my portfolio site that I usually post like releases and stuff is just jamescurcio.com. But the Fallen Cycle is fallencycle.com. And Modern Mythology is modernmythology.net. And I would say, between those, like, especially you look at the blog, it's, most of the releases are things I'm working on. I post, at least if it's a major release.
I will, of course, have all those things in the show notes.
It's so true, though, with social media right now. It's it's weird stratification happening, when all these people are like, follow me on here, and then on other places, follow me on this site. And going to get very vulcanized soon. It's going to be interesting.
This is off topic, but what I tell people is to have a hub of their own, which would be the website. And right now, I'm putting my eggs in one basket. Well, not one basket, but I'm focusing on Mastodon because it's not centralized. So, when people get sick of X, they all jumped on Threads. I'm like, well, you know what's going to happen? That's going to enshittify. And sure enough, that's what happened. So people are jumping on Blue Sky now. Yeah. And I'm like, well, you know what's going to happen with the Blue Sky, right? Yeah. So
eventually, one way or the other. Yeah.
Right. So Mastodon, if you don't like the instance you're on, well, jump onto another instance and bring your other followers with you. We'll see. But anyway, that's besides the point. Mm-hmm. So I think we covered all the things I wanted to talk about. So James, I sure do appreciate you spending time with us today and sharing your thoughts on magic and role-playing games.
Yeah, I had a great time talking. Hopefully some of it was useful or at least, entertaining.
Oh, it was entertaining and useful.
Well, folks, that's the show. If you've got something rattling around in your head you'd like to share, be it a question or a thought or just a kind word, we'd sure love to hear from you. Drop us a line at magethepodcast@gmail.com. You can follow Mage the Podcast on iTunes, Google Play, TuneIn, and just about any podcast app out there. If you enjoyed the show, chances are someone else will too. So if you leave us a review, it helps folks find us a whole lot easier. We're also out there on the socials, Blue Sky, Mastodon, and Threads. And we've got a friendly little community on Discord if you're looking for some good conversation. All those links, and then some, are tucked into the show notes. You can also head on over to magethepodcast.com to catch up on past episodes and dig into full show notes. And yep, we've got a YouTube channel now too. There's a link in the notes, or just poke around on YouTube for Mage the Podcast, and you'll find us. Now, this episode would not be possible without the generous support of our executive producers, and I'd sure like to tip my hat and give them a proper thank you. And I'm going to intone their names like the wizards intone in all the sword and sorcery books I've ever read. They are Oracles Derek Semsick, Jason Vines, Drawn Cap, Ben Bandelo, Sean Gallagher, The Crew of Erebus, Puka G, Christopher Phillips, Guy Stewart, Buck Gregory, Bad Company, and Spartacus. Archmasters Andrew Edelstein, Boto, Brad O. The Blue, Dan Sevenson, Jeff Watt, Leroy Price, Morgan Adden, Simon Strand, and Wolf Larison. And heartfelt thanks to Drunk Des, Jade Barath, Maurice Hopkins, James B., Jervis Johnson, E. B. G., George Lara, Will Vincent, Shatan, Kevin Fitzpatrick, Lauren Jensen, Race Buford, Rebecca Poole, Tyler Bryan, Jason Duncan, Sev Nessus, Bubba the Pale One, Henry Kraft, Eric Schwenke, Starfish, Ambivision, Ryan Stray, Lulz and Stuff, Kathleen Hellperrin, Kelrick, Alexia, Patrick McNamara, Blaze Habert, Daniel Scribner, Ricardo, Rob H., Ryan, Alex, Nikita Klemenov, Leslie Weatherstone, Matthew Pror, Anders S., Bryce, Patty, Michael Parker, James Z., Malise Grouse, Ian Robertson, Curtis Hendricks, That's Real Nito, Sig, Manel Canos, Darren Hennessy, Eli Levenger, David Rowe, Jason Kennedy, Samuel Tobin, Nabiru, Jenna F., Chris Kenner, Grail Trilog H., Daniel Coopan, Ryan Kennedy, Ia Bull, and Stephen Canton. If you'd like to join, if you'd like to join that mighty fun bunch and help us keep the show rolling, there's a link in the show notes to become an executive producer. You'll also get to sit at the round table with us and help shape what's coming next. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll catch you down that crooked path.
Thank everyone for listening. Till next time, truth until paradox, baby.